You will never forget the first time. They remain milestones in your memory, and no matter how much time and distance has passed, they are still as vivid in your mind as the day it happened. I received my very first real kiss between a boy and a girl in the back of a church bus late at night. I was sure I would burn in hell for doing it, but at the time I thought it was worth it. I think that's when I realized the power that members of the opposite sex have over each other. If I went to hell, at least half a dozen other people went there with me. I saw two other young couples locked in a tight embrace. He had his hand under her shirt, she under his pants. I also got my first puppy love heartbreak when my girlfriend left me for a guy with a car. I think that may have shaped my attitude toward promise breakers in my adult life. Later, when I had sex for the first time, it was exactly the same. It was amazing and wonderful and hard for me to process, but one thing I knew for sure was that I really, really enjoyed it. My buddy, not so much. We did it in his mom's brand new Mercury Marquis the weekend after graduation. My buddy was allowed to drive it because he graduated with honors, and it took us 4 hours of frantic cleaning to make it smell new again. We amused ourselves like rabbits for the rest of the summer, pretending to be adults and know what we were doing until she left for college. I never saw her again. She found herself a rich guy in high school, and I was something in the rearview mirror. 40 years later, every time we met, even if she was with her third husband, we ended up meeting glances and smiling. That's the kind of thing you don't forget. Then I fell in love. Naturally, I didn't expect it. It started out with us just goofing around and having a good time, and then, bam, and she became all I could think about. In retrospect, we were too young. I was 19 and she was 20, but the attraction burned like hellfire, hot, bright, and all-consuming. I was a tall, lanky guy with wild hair and glasses. She was tall too, but rounded and lush, with long blonde hair and bright blue eyes that seemed to look right through you. In matters of sex, I was a 1, and she was an 11. She just smiled and taught me things I had no idea how to do, but was damn glad to try. We slept in every conceivable place, in every conceivable position, and in ones that defied rational explanation as often as we could. Suddenly it became more than just sex. We enjoyed each other's company, and we were so good together that she suggested we move in together. 40 years ago, it wasn't as common as it is now, but it happened often enough that no one thought twice about it. We found a tiny 2-bedroom apartment we could afford, and the landlady gave us a discount on the rent. She was a city girl and knew next to nothing, but I'd grown up on a farm, and that made being versatile. Really, if I was patient enough with her, once she understood something, she usually became pretty good at it. One night I proposed to her as she struggled to lift me for the 3rd time. Her hands gripped my gear tightly before she giggled. "You really are a romantic, aren't you? Try it again when we're not horizontal and I'm not leaking like a broken faucet." I asked her again, 3 days later, when we were at her parents' house. Dad wasn't home, but Mom nearly fainted with happiness. The ring was tiny, but that didn't faze her, and the plans were ready. We got married in a simple ceremony because her parents had almost no money. Then we went to Myrtle Beach for 3 days, where she showed off a bikini so tiny, I wondered if it was okay to go to the beach in it. Apparently it was, and a lot of people were pretty darn happy with her choice. She was being molested right in front of me, and I almost exploded because she didn't have time to stop him. She finally saw the look on my face, waved her ring at him, and told him he was a year late. I think she quickly realized I wasn't happy. So we cut our stay at the beach short, and when we got into the room, she was all mine. "Just you, honey. Always." We came home and started living as a couple. We had pretty decent jobs, but I got the opportunity to work for one of the 3 largest employers in the area, making about 1/3 more than I was making at the time. The snag was that they worked on a rotational basis. The first one week, the second one the next week, the third one the week after that. It was a little confusing for the first couple months because I would wake up at random times and question whether I was supposed to be at work, but I adjusted. For about 9 months, everything was fine. But then I started to get an anxious feeling. I would call home when I was at my second job, but no one would pick up. Then there was a power outage. We all went home early, and she wasn't there. She came running in 30 minutes before my shift ended and almost fainted when she saw me. "Where the hell have you been?" She always told me she liked my eyes, but at that moment, I don't think she liked what she saw in them. She stammered for a second before saying she was with her best friend Holly, just riding around. Believe it or not, riding was the order of the day in those days. Gas cost $1/4 gallon, and the kids had their own track. You'd start at the courthouse square, ride down Main Street for about 2 miles, and then stop at the hottest grill in town, do a loop, and ride back. The kids would stop in parking lots to chat and hook up, and the cops were pretty laid back, as long as there was no booze and nothing trashed. "You're a married woman now, Bets. You don't need to go on a cruise." She flared up. I got bored. You can only watch TV to infinity, and I've never liked long conversations on the phone. I'm on the high street in front of hundreds of people, for heaven's sake. You don't think if I slept with 10 people they wouldn't tell you about it, do you? We swore at each other for another hour before we calmed down. I had to admit that I was jealous, and she had to admit that she was enjoying the attention when the guys were talking to them at the coffee shop or in the parking lot while the guys were talking Holly up. "They're not trying to talk you up?" She gave a fleeting chuckle before putting on an indifferent look again. "Of course they're trying, dear. Just because I married you didn't suddenly make me ugly, but I'm making sure they don't do anything." It was a turbulent weekend, but by the time it was over, we had come to an understanding. She could go with Holly, but if I felt something wasn't as it should be, it would be over between us. I think that shook her, because she never thought, even in her wildest dreams, that I would ever leave her. Everything was going well until summer came. That's when the lake parties started. I'd leave for work at 2:30 on the weeks I worked second, and she'd be in a bikini waiting for Holly to pick her up by 3. When you mix hormones, pot and booze in the right ratio, something out of the ordinary happens, and it sparked rumors that reached me. Instead of confronting her, I switched shifts with a guy, and on Friday afternoon I sat at a bus stop in a borrowed car and waited for Holly's van to pass by. I followed them straight to the party site on the lake, parked in the boat lot a half-mile away, and walked back. I sat in the bushes and watched her flirt and drink. An hour later, everyone was tipsy, and Holly stood up. Time to lose weight. Her top flew right past where I was hiding, and her bottom soon followed. Bets was right behind her. There were 5 women and 6 guys, and soon they were all naked. It was getting dark, so I gathered up as many bathing suits and clothes as I could and went to the other side of the cove, stonewalling everything and wading in chest-deep water, then scrambling as far as I could. I watched them sink for a minute and then swam back. I found Bets cuddled up to the guy, one hand on her chest, the other underwater, and she was moaning. I grabbed him by his long hair and sank to the bottom, pulling him with me. Bets stood stunned as my face showed above the surface. The water was churning around me, and the guy was panicking as he tried to catch his breath. "Don't come home, bitch. I'm sure your womanizing buddy will let you stay with him until he gets bored, and then you'll end up on the street like another whore. Maybe I'll stop by sometime. You always had a good head, and I'll bet you're better now that you've had some extra practice." It didn't come out quite so smoothly, but she got the point. In the next instant, Holly was already on my back, drawing grooves with her long fingernails. I pulled the bitch off me and slammed my fist into her stomach. The air came out of her like a punctured balloon, and she went down like a stone. "One of you assholes better pick her up, or you'll be one whore short." Bets tried to say something, but I just ducked underwater again, traveling halfway across the small cove before surfacing. She had been away for 3 weeks, living with her parents. She would go straight to work and come straight home. I got a few indirect threats about me wrinkling their clothes, and I bet the trip home was pretty interesting for some. No one bothered me because I was known to be a pretty good brawler, but more importantly, I didn't know how to walk away. If I was fighting someone, all I could think about was killing them. This led to some pretty interesting situations, and a couple of times I almost went to jail, but word got out. If you fought me, you can rest assured you've won. If you haven't, she begged, she cried, she apologized. One day I stopped her by asking her a question. How much? How many what? How many dudes did you screw while I worked my ass off to give us a better life? She fell silent and I grinned. Too many to remember? No, 3, okay? 3. There you go. You screwed 3 guys and not me, and that tells me you'll never quit. Why stick to the menu when you can have a buffet? Look, we don't have shit. We haven't been together long enough to pay alimony. You take your shit, I'll take mine, and we're done. She fainted. Her mother, whom I had always had sympathy for, came to the apartment to beg me to take her back. She's learned her lesson, son. Give her another chance. You won't regret it. Her father was old school, and he told me to beat the crap out of her and get over it. It was 3 months before we got back together, after many promises and a few threats. By that time, my company had expanded to twice its former building, doubling its production capacity. A side effect was that they no longer needed 3 shifts to get everything done, so they cut the 3rd shift. I was also promoted to lead setup person in the finishing department. We were in production, and when my group started making more money, they started figuring out why. My crew was mostly women, and I had to set up various machines to fill orders, so I always took a box or two to make sure everything was up to spec and in working order. My co-worker would set up the machine, run 2 or 3 products through it, and go back to the office if he was working 2nd shift. I would stay on the floor helping the packer seal and place boxes on the correct pallets, and as we got better, I would teach him a few simpler operations. Sometimes we had 2 or more machines set up and running, so the ladies just went from one to the other with no downtime. The packer and I were getting an average wage from what the line was producing and were making $1 an hour more than our co-workers. It got to the point that if a vacancy came up, the women on the other shift would apply for a transfer. It got to the point where the other guy said to me, "You're making me look bad." I grinned. "No, you're doing it to yourself. You and Jesse need to keep your asses on the floor and help the girls out a little. Then you'd be making money." Things got so bad that management stepped in and asked me to borrow his bagger for a couple weeks to learn my system. I assumed it would be a struggle, but Jesse was more than willing to learn and was very reluctant to go back to his shift when the training was over. John almost kissed me when he got back. "Eric is a jerk and a buffoon. The women despise him, but they've grown to love me. Their wages went up 50 cents an hour, and they begged me to stay with them. 50 cents and $1 doesn't seem like much now, but 45 years ago, it was a lot." Then Eric did a monstrously stupid thing. He hit on a married woman with a jealous husband, threatening her with a job if she didn't do what he wanted. For some reason, she came to me, and I sent her to our manager, who promised to make it right. But he didn't. He and Eric were long-time drinking buddies, so he hid the situation from upper management. It ended with the husband coming into the plant, threatening to kick ass if nothing was done about it. This happened right during a shift, so I sent John to get the production manager and tried to talk him down myself. Then his wife showed up, scared to death. She kept her cool, but when Eric grabbed her so hard that one breast was bruised, she left in the middle of the shift and told her husband everything. Eric walked in, saw us talking to the production manager, and turned pale. Then he tried to bluff. "What is she doing here? I fired her last night for insubordination and poor work performance. The production supervisor was a man in his early 40s, and he'd dealt with this sort of thing before. Eric, you are a supervisor. You have no right to fire anyone. All you can do is document the situation and bring it to your supervisor. I think we should all go to the conference room and talk this over. He called our manager, the plant manager, and they all left. Her husband was still standing there. He was promised that they would handle the situation and he could take his wife home for the night with no repercussions to her job. I, on the other hand, went to my job. The next day, Eric was no longer with us, and the finishing manager was on probation. The production manager called me into his office. Sabrina said she told you about the situation, and you went through channels, referring her to the finishing manager. Is that true? Yes. He sighed. Good. I want to ask for your help. You've trained John pretty well, so we're going to offer him Eric's job. You've also worked with Jesse, but he doesn't have the experience we need. We need you to work with both of them and train someone to fill John's old position. Will you help? I'm thinking maybe shift work to start with, at least 2 months. We'll make it worth your while. What does Bill think about that? Bill was the finishing manager. The production manager smiled. Oh, he agrees. Do you agree? That was another $2 an hour. I couldn't wait to tell Betts. Betts looked impressed. So, you got a raise and you're working double shifts. Is that some kind of promotion? Sort of. It'll make me look good in front of management. Who knows? Well, okay then. It'll be nice to have you home every night. For 2 weeks, I worked 12 hours a day, if not more. Things were going my way when another incident occurred. The finishing manager was unhappy that I was on probation and tried to take it out on me. It got to the point where I was under the machine fixing a breakdown. I had already switched the crew to another job, but this order was very urgent. I had already taken it apart when he called me into his office. Our office was nothing more than an 8-by-8 cubicle with glass overlooking the floor. He could literally see me from his seat. I continued to work. He called me again and then did something incredibly stupid. He whistled into the speakerphone and said, "My office now." I finished the repair, told the new guy to get the ladies back to the car, and stormed into the office. He was about ready to rant, but I stopped him by getting right in his face. Let me tell you something. If you want something to come when you whistle, you need to get a damn dog. Is it clear in here? So what do you want? You can't disrespect me like that. I'll fire your ass. You want respect? Earn it. Let's stay professional. I repeat, what do you want? He ranted for 5 minutes, forgetting that the speakerphone was on. The entire plant could hear him, not just my group. You're fired. Get out of here. He was about to launch into another tirade when the door opened and the production manager walked in, followed by the plant manager. The plant manager reached over and turned off the speakerphone. He then turned to face the finishing manager. You should make sure things like that are turned off before you rant. You want to tell me what happened here? I called him on speakerphone to come to my office. I gave him a direct order. He didn't follow it. And then he came in and was rude to me. He looked at me. Did he call you? Yes, he did. And you came? I was at No. 1, moving the shaft. I was right in front of him, and he could see me from his office. I only had about 5 minutes before the repairs were finished, so I stayed. It's a mirror order, sir, and they need it by morning. As soon as I was done, I went in to see him and told him I didn't like being called a dog. You probably heard what I said, and I'm not retracting what I said. Mira was our biggest customer and incredibly finicky, but we were making tons of money off of them, and we weren't going to upset them. He looked at the manager. Did you know why he worked so hard on it? It doesn't matter. He disrespected me, and I want something done about it. You think whistling for him like a pet wasn't disrespectful? Grow up, Bill. This is the real world. He turned to me. You, get back to work. Come by my office in the morning. Then he looked at the manager. And you leave him alone so he can do his job. One more confrontation, and one or both of you will have to leave. Understood? He didn't like it. Didn't like it at all, but he shook his head. I need to hear you say it out loud. No more confrontations. He looked between us. That's enough of that. Now it's time for us to go home. Jeff, make sure Mira's order is completed before you leave, okay? Yes, sir. If looks could kill, I'd be dead before I'd even taken 6 steps out of the office. I walked over to my packer, and we helped the women finish the order, completing it a little faster than usual because we had enough people to do it. The next day, I arrived a little early and waited outside the plant manager's office for a few minutes before he called me in to see him. He leaned back in his chair and just stared at me for a minute, then grinned. I've had an interesting morning. I talked to the ladies on duty, and they all told the same story, that Eric proposed to all of them, and Bill did nothing about it, even proposing to a couple himself. When I contradicted him, he became furious and threatened to quit, and I let him. He tried to take it back, but I told him we would start a formal investigation, possibly involve the police, and he walked away. This puts me in a difficult position. For the foreseeable future, you're going to be the interim trim manager. I still want you to work shift work and train everyone, but from now on, you must attend staff meetings every afternoon. Do a good job, Jeff, and maybe you'll get this position on a permanent basis. Interested? Hell yes, I was interested. My salary was raised another $3, which was well above average for the times. Bets seemed thrilled, especially since it meant we could buy a house sometime in the future. 3 months later, I got a call from a friend. Barry ran a loan company, one of those not quite predatory ones that usually gave loans at 5% or higher than the banks. Hey kid, still looking for a house? Not really. I don't have anywhere near the down payment I need. How much do you have? I told him, and felt myself smirk over the phone. Come over to my place. I might have something you'd be interested in. Something turned out to be a 4-year-old one-bedroom house on a half-acre of land. The owners had moved out and defaulted on the loan, and I could get it to pay off the debt. Betts and I talked about it, and while it wasn't exactly what we were looking for, we agreed that we had to start somewhere, and maybe in a few years we could find a real home. It was one of the proudest days of my life when I carried Betts over the threshold, and she giggled the whole time. Since I grew up on a farm, I got right into landscaping. I started with the yard, reseeded it, set aside a small space for a garden. Dad came and helped me build a 12 by 12 building and a fence in the backyard. Betts went out and bought enough tomatoes to cover the whole yard and more, so we planted what we could and gave away the rest. I can still see her smile when she picked her first tomato. Betts was good at her job, working her way up from farm assistant to inventory specialist, and our future couldn't have been brighter. I was still working 13 hours a day, but I was now a salaried employee, so I wasn't entitled to overtime. Betts kind of resented it until I told her that I estimated that before the end of the month, I would be back to my normal schedule. John was working very well, and while Jesse may not be as bright, he was learning. The new guy we hired for packaging was his cousin, and was thrilled with the job he was getting. Soon production was 8% higher than ever. They even sent corporate guys over to observe the work. It was summer, and I was coming home at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, 6 days a week. And then it happened that I came home, and she was gone. She came in drunk about 11 o'clock, and Holly dropped her off. I didn't say a word as she stumbled around getting ready for bed. Even after the shower, I could smell the grass from her. When I got up, she was still out cold and late for work. I left her in bed and went to work. When I got home in the evening, she was very depressed. She had made a nice dinner, some of my favorite dishes and didn't say a word. After washing the dishes, we sat down at the table and grabbed the TV remote. I snatched it out of her hands. So you're not even going to talk about last night? That was a mistake. I shouldn't have stayed that long, but I had a good time. You shouldn't have stayed there at all. You know how I feel about Holly, but you left. Screw the old man, I want to have fun. He'll get over it. Right? I could tell by her blush that I was very close to it. Here's the thing. We're not going to talk about it. If you slept with some random guy, sooner or later it's going to come out. If you did, it's over between us. There won't be any more chances. Understand? She turned a little pale and promised never to speak again, but I could see the resentment in her eyes. Things were quiet for a while. Holly came to my work, wanting to get a job and apologize. I couldn't wait for the interview. I let her chat for a while about what a good employee she would be before I stopped her. Holly, you've been fired from 3 jobs in the last 9 months, all for attendance. You know how strict this company is about that, and I highly doubt you'll last 2 months. That's because you're still mad about me and Bets. Asshole! She's not 90. She needs to go out and have fun once in a while. You need to relieve yourself and let her breathe. She can breathe all she wants as long as she's with me. I know my schedule was crazy, but it's back to normal now. If she wants to do it with someone else, she's free to leave. Personal issues aside, I'm afraid we won't be offering you a position, Miss Walton. Good luck next time. She went straight to the plant manager, and he called me in after she left. I take it you don't like that woman? I'd spit on the ground she walks on, but I'd dehydrate in less than an hour. She and I have a problem because of my wife, but that's not why I didn't hire her. Look at her work history. That was the end of the conversation. It was October before she slipped again. My company sent me to a plant 2 states away for a training seminar. I was anxious and nervous, but despite that, the 3 days were productive. When I got home, it was as if my mind had gone numb. It was an empty house and a note on the kitchen table. I really tried, but I met someone. I've already moved my stuff, so don't try to find me. I'll always love you, just not like I used to. Unfortunately, that didn't upset me as much as I thought it would. Instead of grieving, I went to bed and slept for 10 hours. When I got up, I looked around. She had removed all traces of her presence, except for the picture of us together that she had left on my nightstand. It went straight to the trash can. A few weeks passed, and I think she was surprised that I didn't file a report. My opinion was that she wanted it. She should pay for it. I was too old and tired to go on cruises, but one evening I was driving through town and saw her and Holly in Holly's customized van. Holly made sure to ring the little bell hanging from the rearview mirror as she drove by. I thought it sounded silly. I headed to the drive-in to have a triple burger with onion rings, their specialty. A little while later, Holly ran past, alone, ringing her bell. By the time I was done, Bets, not noticing Holly, rang the bell as well. One of the guys next to me laughed. I can see the horny one ringing. Curiosity took over, so I asked, "Those 2 girls are the craziest, horniest women I've ever seen. They go on a cruise, hook up with a guy, and one gets behind the wheel while the other fiddles around in the van. Then they switch guys and drivers. They call that little bell the horn bell, and it rings a lot. I've gotten rides from both of them in the last month." I thought about it for a while and had to admit that it had hit me more than I thought it would. But it wasn't my problem anymore, so I finished my burger and went home. The fact that Bets and I had broken up wasn't immediately known. I wasn't unattractive, I was in good shape, I had a nice car and my own house, albeit a 1-story one, so the sharks started circling me. I dated 2 and heard that Bets had given one of them a good whipping. I wondered what the significance was to her that I could have sex as easily as she could. The week before Thanksgiving, she picked up a guy, and they were together for almost a month. until he dumped her. A few days before Christmas, she called me at work and asked if I would come over to her place in the next couple days. Apparently, she had a Christmas present for me. Curious as to what she was up to, I agreed. She collected little dove figurines, so I splurged and bought her a very pretty one, trying to rub it in her face that I had money for such things. She met me at the door in a tight mini dress, her hair done up just the way I liked it. The telltale flashes started right away because I knew that had to mean she wanted something. She sat me down at the table and brought me a beer, leaning over so that her breasts were in front of my face. Very nice breasts with incredibly sensitive nipples, if I remembered correctly. We talked for another minute before she handed me a gift, a rather nice watch. When she saw the dove, she cried, jumped into my lap and kissed me hard. It was a terribly bad idea, but I hadn't had sex in a month, and despite all her other faults, she was a terrific slut. She had a couple tricks she must have learned after we broke up. Since I was only doing it for sex, I appreciated it. When I finally gave in, she asked if I could stay the night. Why? Obviously marriage isn't for you. Why would I waste my time with a dead horse? I'd rather just bury it and move on with my life. Bets began to cry, huge tears and tearful sobs. There was a lot of apologizing and pleading, and now you can call me Kitty, because she got me. I promised her I would think about it, and we fell asleep. Then she cried and said she was very sorry for what she had done to me, that she still loved me, and would do everything in her power to get us back together. She jumped up to take a shower, lamenting that it wasn't big enough for the both of us. I laid on my back and dozed off. The ringing of the phone woke me up, and I lay there listening to her end of the conversation. Christmas party? And then another one for New Year's Eve at the Radisson. Do you have a number yet? I'd love to go. She was quiet for a minute, then giggled. Yeah, I hooked up with him last night, but I'll tell him we have to wait until the first of the year to be together again. In the meantime, it's party, party, party. I got up as quietly as I could and got dressed. When I walked into the living room, she squeaked, I gotta go. Talk to you later. Who was that? Holly. You know how she likes to talk. If it was Holly on the other end, her voice had definitely gotten deeper. Bets wrapped the towel around her hair and body, and as she stood, it fell off her. I looked at her long, smooth legs, gorgeous ass and gorgeous bob, and sighed, realizing this was the last time I would see them. Deciding to ease her mind, I told her that I already had plans for Christmas, and maybe we should wait a little while before we got back together. She pretended to be sad, but she wasn't very good at it. I thought about it as I drove, her scent still lingering on me, and realized that I had just experienced another first in my life, the first time my heart was truly broken. Up until that moment, some irrational part of my brain had truly believed that we would eventually get back together and live happily ever after. Christmas and New Year's Eve passed. I never called, and I heard through the grapevine that her new lover had dropped her like a stone on January 2nd, so I wasn't too surprised when she called me at work. At home, I purposely didn't pick up the phone, let the answering machine answer. After the fifth message, I could hear the desperation in her voice. Hey, Bets, how are you doing? You and me, I hope. I seem to remember some promises the last time I saw you. Well, I've been pretty busy at work. One of my stand-in guys and I have been working tirelessly, so romance has taken a back seat. There was silence, and I continued before she could finish. Oh, I have to go. There's an urgent matter on the line. I'll call you later. For the next 2 weeks, we played the phone game. One evening, she called and looked very depressed. You're not coming back, are you? No, I'm not coming back. I'm tired of being treated like a pinball that you can throw one way or the other. When you blew me off at Christmas to go have fun, I realized that even if we were together, you'd start over sooner or later. So that's it. Goodbye. I'm sorry for the way things turned out, and I'm willing to take some of the blame because of my work schedule, but most of the blame lies with you. Every time you had a choice, you made the wrong one. Goodbye, Bets. Maybe in the future, you'll find a guy who will let you play. She was crying and trying to speak when I hung up the phone. There was one more chapter to this little story. The day after Valentine's Day, she came in and woke me up, pulling my long hair and giving me all kinds of hell. I finally woke up enough to pull her off me. What the fuck is wrong with you? You have to give me the key back before you leave, and that's going to be pretty soon. What do you want? Turns out, no one had invited her to Valentine's Day, and I had to step in. I'm sorry you're dating such a cheap bastard that he dumped you 2 days before the big night. But really, Bets, we're not together anymore, so why should I give a shit about it? Give him a week, and he'll be back to sniff things out. Now is the time for you to go. She stopped talking and looked down at the bed. There lay a red bra, about 2 sizes larger than she wore. If she looked under the bed, she would find matching bikini panties. It was cruel, but I couldn't help it. Yeah, I had a really good Valentine's Day. Now shoo, she'll be back any minute, and I don't want an awkward situation. I walked her to her car and smirked as another person pulled up beside her. Who was that, and why was she crying? My soon-to-be ex-wife. I guess her Valentine's Day wasn't as good as ours. Crystal knew the story and chuckled, then pulled me back into the house. Why was I thinking about all this? My granddaughter was lying in her grandmother's arms, crying from heartbreak. I looked at them and grinned. You know what's even better than first love? The last one. I'd been with this woman for 40 years and prayed I'd have that many more. This was based on my first marriage and 2 other couples I was around when I was younger. My first wife recently died of COVID. She reformed and married a good man after he and I survived 3 others. She married 6 times, if you count the one guy she married twice before it worked out. Rest in peace, Deb.